Mr. Harrison was the kind of man whose name carried weight wherever it was spoken. People in the business world admired him, some feared him, and many envied him. He had built an empire from almost nothing, rising from a small-town boy with big dreams to a billionaire whose offices touched the skies of New York City. He was a man of great ambition, strong determination, and endless energy when it came to money and power. Yet, behind all the luxury, the grand house, and the expensive cars, there was a part of his life that left him feeling powerless. That part of his life was his daughter, Emily. Emily was only 12 years old, a girl with the brightest smile and the softest voice. She had been born with a rare condition that left her unable to walk. Her wheelchair became part of her identity, but it never stopped her from being cheerful when she could. She loved to draw pictures of flowers, listen to music, and tell stories to anyone who would listen. Still, deep inside, she often felt lonely. Her mother had passed away years ago when Emily was still too little to understand what loss truly meant. That left Harrison as her only parent. He provided her with everything money could buy. She had the best doctors, the latest medical equipment, a beautiful bedroom decorated like a princess's castle, and tutors to help her study from home. But while Harrison made sure every material need was taken care of, he himself was hardly ever there. His excuse was always the same: he was working hard for her future. But in reality, the future was all he ever thought about, and he often forgot about the present moments that Emily so desperately longed to share with him. In the giant mansion where they lived, silence often filled the halls. The only sounds were the footsteps of workers, chefs, cleaners, gardeners, drivers who kept the place running. Among them, no one dared to cross personal boundaries with Emily. Harrison had made it clear, staff were there to serve, not to get too close. He believed that mixing roles might create problems. So while Emily was surrounded by people, she often felt like she was on an island all by herself. Everything began to change the day Grace walked into the mansion. Grace was a woman in her mid-40s, with a calm face and eyes that seemed to hold a deep history. She wore simple clothes, carried herself with quiet respect, and never tried to draw attention. She had been hired through a domestic staff agency after the last maid retired. From the very beginning, she stood out not because she was loud or overly friendly, but because of the quiet way she seemed to notice things others ignored. On her first day, Grace greeted Emily with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Miss Emily," she said softly as she arranged books on the shelf. Emily returned the smile, though she was used to new faces coming and going. Most staff didn't stay long. Some found it too demanding to work in a billionaire's mansion with strict rules. Others simply moved on to different opportunities. Emily didn't expect much from Grace either, but there was something about the warmth in her voice that felt different. As days passed, Grace settled into her work. She was not just efficient, but thoughtful. She noticed that Emily liked her pillows arranged in a certain way, that she liked her juice slightly colder, and that she liked to hear stories before bedtime even if she pretended she didn't. Grace would quietly adjust these little things without being told, and Emily began to feel seen. Still, Mr. Harrison barely noticed any of this. His mornings started with early calls, his afternoons with meetings, and his evenings with endless dinners with clients. He often returned home late at night, tired and distracted, carrying the weight of his business on his shoulders. He would stop by Emily's room for a quick goodnight kiss, but even in those moments, his mind was often elsewhere. Emily learned not to ask too many questions when he was around. She didn't want to bother him, though she longed for more time with him. One afternoon, when the golden light of the sun filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, Grace found Emily sitting quietly by her window, staring out at the garden. She looked a little sad. "What are you thinking about, Miss Emily?" Grace asked softly as she dusted a table nearby. Emily hesitated, then said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm just here, and everyone else is out there living. I can't run, I can't dance. Daddy is always busy. It feels like no one really has time for me." Grace paused, her heart heavy with the words of the young girl. She knelt beside her, her eyes level with Emily's. "You are very special, Miss Emily. Don't ever think that you are forgotten. Sometimes people love us so much, they get busy trying to build a world for us, but they forget that what we need most is their time. But that doesn't mean they don't care." Emily looked at her curiously. She wasn't used to staff speaking so openly. Grace smiled, reached for one of Emily's drawings, and said, "This is beautiful. You know, you have a gift. Not everyone can create something so bright on paper. When people see this, they'll see your heart." For the first time in a while, Emily felt her cheeks warm with pride. Days turned into weeks, and Grace became someone Emily looked forward to seeing. She would share little stories about her day, ask for help with her drawings, and even laugh at Grace's gentle humor. Grace never crossed professional lines openly. She did her duties carefully, but her quiet kindness filled the empty spaces in Emily's world. Yet, Harrison had no idea about this growing bond. He still believed that everything in his daughter's life was managed by systems, staff, and structure. He assumed she was content because she never complained directly to him. But Emily was slowly beginning to change. She smiled more, laughed more, and even asked her father a few times to join her for simple things like coloring a picture or watching the sunset from her window. Harrison always gave the same reply, "Maybe later, sweetheart. Daddy has some work to finish first." He would ruffle her hair, kiss her forehead, and rush off. Emily would smile and say, "Okay, Daddy," but the small disappointment in her eyes was something Grace noticed every time. Grace never judged Harrison. She understood the pressures of work, though she also knew that love could not always wait. She began to pray silently in her heart that one day, Harrison would slow down enough to see what his daughter truly needed. One particular evening, when Harrison was away on a business trip, Grace found Emily in her room with tears rolling down her cheeks. She had tried to reach for a book from a high shelf but couldn't. The frustration of being unable to do simple things overwhelmed her. Grace immediately rushed to her side, knelt down, and wrapped her arms around her. "It's all right, sweetheart. You are strong, stronger than you think. Don't let moments like this make you forget how precious you are." Emily clung to her, crying softly, and for the first time, she felt safe in someone's arms who wasn't family but still cared deeply. In that moment, a bond was sealed between them, quiet, gentle, and unspoken. What Grace didn't know was that this act of comfort, so natural and filled with love, would one day be the very thing that shook the walls of the mansion and opened a story that none of them expected. Mr. Harrison was not a man who often returned home early. His days were long, filled with endless meetings, business calls, and responsibilities that stretched far into the night. But on this particular afternoon, something unusual happened. A meeting was cancelled, and for the first time in months, he found himself driving back to his mansion while the sun was still high in the sky. As his car rolled through the iron gates and stopped in front of the grand house, Harrison thought of surprising his daughter. Emily always loved surprises, and perhaps it would make up for the many evenings he had missed. Carrying his briefcase, he walked into the quiet hallways of the mansion. The house was so large that his footsteps echoed against the marble floor. He expected to find Emily in her room, reading or drawing. But as he passed by the wide hallway leading to the playroom, he heard a soft sound: laughter. Emily's laughter. It was gentle, sweet, and filled with joy. It was a sound he had not heard in a long time, at least not this freely. Curious, he slowed his steps and moved toward the open door. When he reached the doorway, he froze. Inside the playroom, sunlight poured through the large windows, filling the space with golden light. Emily sat in her wheelchair, a wide smile on her face, her eyes shining brighter than he had seen in months. Kneeling beside her was Grace, the maid. She had her arms gently wrapped around Emily, hugging her close as the little girl leaned against her shoulder. Emily's head rested there comfortably, as though she had found the safest place in the world. For a moment, Harrison could not move. He stood frozen, trying to understand what he was seeing. His first reaction was shock. He had given strict instructions to all staff: maintain respect, maintain distance, never become too personal. To him, professional lines existed for a reason. And yet here was Grace, not only breaking that rule but holding his daughter in a way that looked almost maternal. A mix of emotions rushed through him. Surprise, confusion, and then, slowly, a spark of anger. He stepped inside the room, his voice firmer than he intended. "What's going on here?" Both Emily and Grace looked up quickly. Emily's smile faded, her small hands tightening on the armrest of her wheelchair. Grace slowly pulled back, her expression calm but respectful. "Daddy," Emily said quickly, her voice nervous, "it's not what you think. We were just..." She hesitated, looking at Grace as if asking for help. Grace lowered her eyes respectfully. "Sir," she was upset earlier. "I was only trying to comfort her." Harrison's brows furrowed. "Comfort her? That's not your place. You are here to work, not..." He stopped himself before finishing, but his voice carried clear disapproval. Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "Daddy, please don't be mad at her. She understands me. She makes me feel better." The room grew quiet. Harrison looked at his daughter's pleading face, then back at Grace, who remained calm, not defending herself with excuses but also not looking guilty. For a moment, he felt torn. Inside him, a battle began. On one side was his protective instinct. He had always feared that outsiders might overstep boundaries or take advantage of his daughter's vulnerability. That was why he set such strict rules for the staff. On the other side was something softer, something harder to admit. For the first time in a long while, he had seen his daughter truly happy. But instead of addressing that feeling, he hardened his voice. "Grace, I'd like to speak with you later," he said firmly. Then, turning to Emily, he forced a smile. "Sweetheart, why don't you rest for a while? I'll come by your room later." Emily wanted to say more, but the look in her father's eyes stopped her. She nodded quietly, her joy replaced with worry. Grace stood and gave a small bow of respect before leaving the room, her face unreadable. Harrison walked out as well, but his mind was anything but calm. He could not forget the image of his daughter clinging to Grace. The hug had looked so natural, so filled with affection. Yet wasn't that dangerous? If Emily grew too attached to someone who was just an employee, wouldn't it end in disappointment when that person eventually left? Staff came and went, he had seen it many times before. He had built walls around Emily's world to protect her from that kind of heartbreak. That evening, Harrison called Grace into his study. The room was dim, lit only by the golden glow of a lamp. His desk was covered with papers, but his focus was only on her. She stood respectfully in front of him, her hands folded, her posture straight. "I saw what happened today," he began, his tone controlled but cold. "I made it clear when you were hired. You are here to do your duties, nothing more. Hugging my daughter is not part of your job." Grace met his eyes calmly. "I understand, sir." But she was upset. Sometimes, children need comfort more than words. His jaw tightened. "That's not your decision to make. You don't know her the way I do." Grace's voice softened. "With respect, sir, I may not know everything about her life, but I do know what it feels like when a child's heart needs someone to hold them." For a brief second, Harrison was taken aback by her words. There was something in her tone, gentle but steady, that made him pause. Still, he dismissed it quickly. "That will be all," he said firmly. "Please remember the rules of this household." Grace nodded, bowed slightly, and left the room. When the door closed, Harrison leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Why did her words echo in his mind? Why did the memory of his daughter's smile, the joy on her face, linger stronger than his anger. That night, as he kissed Emily good night, she looked at him with hopeful eyes. "Daddy, Grace makes me feel like I'm not alone. Please don't be mad at her." Her words pierced him in a way he didn't expect. He smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "Get some sleep, sweetheart," he said softly, avoiding a direct answer. As he left her room, his heart felt heavier than usual. He didn't realize it yet, but the simple hug he had witnessed would become the beginning of a truth far deeper than anything he had imagined. The days after that unexpected scene were heavy inside the mansion. Mr. Harrison found himself restless, replaying the moment in his mind again and again. He couldn't forget the way Emily had leaned into Grace's arms, so comfortable, so trusting. It bothered him. Was it right? Was it wrong? He wasn't sure anymore. On the surface, Harrison kept his usual routine. He left early, returned late, and buried himself in work. But whenever he was at home, he found his eyes drifting toward Emily, studying her more closely. She seemed brighter, happier, more alive. She laughed more freely, her face lit up whenever Grace entered the room. It was impossible to ignore. Harrison had built his fortune by trusting facts, numbers, and discipline. Emotions, in his view, only clouded judgment. But in this case, the facts didn't add up neatly. Grace was not family. She was an employee. Yet somehow, she was giving his daughter something that even he, her father, had not been able to give. That realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. One evening, as he sat in his study, he called Grace again. She entered quietly, as always, her presence calm. "Grace," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "I want to understand something. Why does Emily seem so attached to you?" Grace looked at him steadily. "Because I listen to her, sir. And because she feels safe with me." His brow furrowed. "Safe? Are you saying she doesn't feel safe with me?" Grace shook her head softly. "No, sir. That's not what I meant. She loves you dearly. But children, especially children with challenges, they often need more than care. They need connection. They need someone to hear their little worries, their little joys. Sometimes that's all it takes." Her words were simple, but they struck him like a quiet thunder. He thought about the many times Emily had asked him to sit with her, to look at her drawings, to watch the sunset together. He had always promised later. But later rarely came. Was he failing her? He didn't like the doubt creeping into his heart, so he responded firmly. "You must remember your role here. You are her maid, not her parent. There are lines we must not cross." Grace lowered her gaze. "Yes, sir. I understand." But the conversation left him unsettled. He found himself watching Emily even more closely after that. A few days later, Harrison decided to spend a quiet afternoon at home. He had cleared his schedule, telling himself he needed rest. But part of him also wanted to see for himself what was happening when he wasn't around. He walked down the hallway toward Emily's room. The door was slightly open, and he stopped outside, listening. Inside, Emily's voice was soft but excited. "Grace, do you know what Daddy said last year? He promised we'd go to the park together. But he forgot." There was a pause, and then Grace's gentle voice. "Maybe he didn't forget, sweetheart. Maybe he just got busy." Emily sighed. "He's always busy. I wish he would sit with me more. When you sit with me, it feels like I matter." Harrison's chest tightened. He leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of her words press deep into him. Then Grace spoke again, her tone warm but steady. "Emily, your father loves you very much. Sometimes love looks different than what we expect. He works hard because he wants you to have everything. But I understand how you feel. Sometimes we just need someone to hold us and remind us that we're not alone." Emily whispered, that's why I like when you hug me. It makes me feel like mommy is here again." At those words, tears filled Harrison's eyes. He turned and walked away quietly, unable to listen any longer. His mind was torn. Part of him wanted to thank Grace for giving Emily comfort. Another part of him felt almost replaced. That evening at dinner, Harrison sat across from Emily at the long dining table. The chandelier sparkled above them, the silver cutlery shone, but the silence between father and daughter felt louder than any words. Finally, Emily looked up at him with her wide eyes. "Daddy, are you upset with Grace?" Harrison paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because you look at her differently now. Please don't be upset. She's my friend. She makes me happy." Her innocent plea went straight to his heart. He forced a smile. "I'm not upset, Emily. I just want what's best for you." Emily's face softened, and she went back to eating. But Harrison knew the truth. He was upset. Not at Grace, not even at Emily, but at himself. For years, he had believed money and resources could